In Afghanistan, internal trafficking is more common than transnational trafficking, and most of the trafficking victims are children. Trafficking is slavery. Children are slaves forced to work in carpet making and brick factories, as assistant truck drivers and beggars. Children are forced to work in the poppy farms and smuggle drugs. Children are forced into marriage and become domestic slaves and sex slaves. Recruiting, transporting, keeping or receiving a human being for the purpose of exploitation is human trafficking. Getting a human being or their guardian to consent to being exploited by using threats or force, abduction or deceit, or taking advantage of one's vulnerability or power is human trafficking. Giving or receiving a payment of any kind from the exploitation of a human being is human trafficking. If a slave is paid, it doesn't mean it's not slavery. Many victims surrender to being exploited because they're desperate and poor. If you saw someone chained to a pole like a slave, you'd be horrified. Modern slavery isn't as obvious or explicit, but it's all around us. Bachabazi might not look like slavery, but it is. And like modern slavery, it has different forms. Some young boys are kept for sex, some for dancing, some for both. Some are used for companionship or for showing off the wealth and power of the Bachabaz who keep them. Bachabazi is a bigger crime than sexual assault. The negative psychosocial impacts of Bachabazi on the victims and their families last for a long time. They're stigmatized and isolated from their communities. The children suffer depression and PTSD and have suicidal tendencies. They're sick from labor and physical assault, and they have sexual diseases. They can't trust people or maintain relationships. They're always under threat of re-victimization or arrest. Their families reject them and they lack safe accommodation. They can't access jobs. And they live in terror that their traffickers will seek revenge. Some traditional Afghan practices can be considered as human trafficking because the human being is being used for the purpose of exploitation. When the marriage is forced, bad, which is marriage for conflict resolution, and badal, which is an exchange of brides for dowry reduction, and marriage for debt repayment can be considered human trafficking. Even though it's hidden, Bachabazi and all forms of human trafficking are a serious threat to Afghan society. They threaten the rule of law, social order and ethics. They strengthen organized crime networks and corruption. They devalue national standards of human rights and destabilize family structures. Today's children are the future of this country, and failing to protect them is a failure to protect Afghanistan.